What happened when you refused to be your family's punching bag? The champagne flute slipped from my fingers as my father's voice boomed across the wedding reception, cutting through conversations like a knife through silk. You know what Marcus's problem is? Dad gestured toward me with his beer bottle, his face already flushed from too much alcohol. He's selfish. Always has been. Can't help his own family when we're struggling, but he's got money for fancy apartments and expensive cars. 200 guests turned to stare. My cousin Sarah, radiant in her wedding dress just moments before, looked mortified. The string quartet faltered mid-song. My throat closed up. After 28 years of this, 28 years of being blamed for everything that went wrong in the Castellano family, I should have been used to it. But having my father announce to a room full of relatives, family friends, and Sarah's new in-laws that I was the reason for all our problems felt like being stripped naked in public. Dad, please, I started. Don't Dad please me, he continued, swaying slightly. Your mother's been crying herself to sleep because we might lose the house, and you're sitting there in your $1,000 suit acting like you don't know we exist. The irony was suffocating. For the past 3 years, I've been secretly sending them $1,200 every month. Not because they asked, they were too proud for that, but because Mom would call crying about the mortgage, or Dad would mention their credit card debt in passing, or my younger brother Jake would hint that his student loans were drowning him. I've been quietly keeping them afloat while living in a studio apartment in Queens and driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic. But standing there, watching 200 people judge me based on my father's drunken lies, something inside me snapped. You want to talk about money, Dad? I stood up, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Let's talk about money. My mother grabbed his arm. Vincent, sit down. This isn't the place. No, Mom. He brought it up. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking with adrenaline. Should I show everyone the Venmo receipts? Every month for 3 years. Or maybe we should discuss what happened to Grandma Rose's college fund she left me. The color drained from both my parents' faces. Marcus, Mom's voice was barely a whisper. The $47,000 fund that somehow disappeared when I was 21 and too trusting to check the account statements. The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam. The money I only found out about last month when I got curious and called the bank. My father set down his beer with a sharp clink. That money went to keeping this family together when your brother needed. When Jake needed rehab that you never told me about. When Lisa needed bail money for her 3rd DUI. When you refinanced the house to cover gambling debts you thought I'd never find out about. The reception hall had gone completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. Sarah appeared at my elbow, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Maybe we should take this outside, she whispered urgently. But I was done taking things outside, done protecting their secrets, done being their emotional punching bag while they painted me as the villain to everyone else. For the first time in my adult life, I looked at my parents and felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I think it's time everyone knew the truth. The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. I could see my brother Jake sliding lower in his chair at table 4, probably praying the floor would swallow him whole. My sister Lisa had her phone out, no doubt ready to livestream the family implosion for her Instagram followers. Marcus, honey, you're upset, Mom said, her voice taking on that syrupy tone she used when she was about to gaslight me into submission. You know we can explain everything if you just. Explain what, exactly? I interrupted, pulling up my banking app. My hands had stopped shaking. Explain how you forged my signature on the withdrawal forms. Because yes, I have copies of those too now. Turns out the bank keeps records of everything. Uncle Tony, Dad's brother, cleared his throat. Maybe the kid has a point, Vince. You never mentioned Marcus was helping out. Because he wasn't, Dad snapped, but his bluster was weakening. A couple hundred here and there doesn't. $14,400 last year alone, I read from my phone screen. Should I break it down by month? January 15th, $600 for Mom's emergency dental work that turned out to be Lisa's credit card minimum payment. February 3rd, $800 because the water heater broke, but really you needed to cover Jake's car payment after he crashed his Mustang. Stop it, Lisa hissed, standing up so fast her chair toppled backward. You're being a psycho, Marcus. It's Sarah's wedding day. I'm being a psycho. The laugh that escaped me sounded foreign, bitter. I've been bankrolling this family for years while you all told everyone who'd listen that I was a selfish disappointment. Do you know what it's like to have Aunt Marie corner me at Christmas and lecture me about family loyalty? To have Dad's work friends shake their heads at me like I'm some kind of deadbeat son. Aunt Marie, sitting 3 tables away, had the decency to look ashamed. Sarah's new father-in-law, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, leaned over to whisper something to his wife. I watched her eyes widen, and I knew exactly what he was telling her. What kind of family did we just marry into? The college fund, I continued, my voice gaining strength, was supposed to be my inheritance from Grandma Rose. She worked double shifts at the hospital for 30 years, saved every penny, because she wanted her grandchildren to have opportunities she never had. And you stole it. We didn't steal anything, Dad said, but his voice cracked on the word steal. We were going to pay it back when. When what? When your gambling problem magically fixed itself. When Jake suddenly got clean without any actual consequences for his actions. When Lisa stopped treating credit cards like free money. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of relatives who'd been judging me for years. Here's something else you might find interesting. The reason Dad lost his job at Morrison Construction. It wasn't budget cuts. He was caught skimming money from supply orders. The reason we moved 3 times during my senior year. Mom was running a check-kiting scheme that finally caught up with her. That's enough. Dad roared, lurching to his feet. His beer bottle crashed to the floor, amber liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. You ungrateful little. Ungrateful. Something hot and vicious unfurled in my chest. I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. I looked directly at Jake, whose face had gone gray. He knew what was coming. Tell them about Stephanie, Jake. Tell them why she really broke up with you. Jake's face went from gray to green. Marcus, don't. Don't what? Don't tell everyone how you've been cheating on every girlfriend you've ever had. How Stephanie didn't just decide she needed space, but actually caught you in bed with her roommate. I could feel the momentum building, years of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. Or maybe we should talk about why you really got kicked out of state. It wasn't academic probation, was it? Jesus Christ, Marcus, Jake whispered, but his voice carried in the deadly silence. Sarah grabbed my arm harder. Marcus, I'm begging you. But I was looking at my parents now, seeing them clearly for maybe the first time in my life. Mom's perfectly applied makeup was starting to streak with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of embarrassment, of being exposed. Dad's hands were clenched into fists, his face red with the kind of rage he usually reserved for when I dared to defend myself in private. The credit card fraud, Jake. Tell them about the credit card fraud. I pulled up another screen on my phone. Because guess whose name and social security number got used to open 5 different accounts? Guess who's been paying the minimum balances to keep them out of collections? Uncle Tony stood up. Vincent, what the hell is he talking about? It wasn't like that, Jake stammered. I was going to tell you, Marcus. I was going to figure out how to fix it. When my credit score tanked so low I couldn't get approved for a car loan. When I had to explain to my landlord why there were suddenly liens against my name. I laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. I've been paying for crimes I didn't even know you'd committed in my name. The room erupted in whispers. Sarah's mother-in-law stood up and walked out, her husband following with an apologetic glance back at Sarah. Other guests were starting to shift uncomfortably, some reaching for their purses. Marcus Anthony Castellano, you stop this right now, Mom said, using my full name like I was still 8 years old and had broken her favorite vase. This is not how we handle family business. Family business? I turned to face her fully. You mean like how you handled it when you told everyone at Lisa's graduation party that I was going through a selfish phase because I couldn't afford to buy her a car? While I was working 60-hour weeks and living on ramen so I could keep sending you money? Lisa was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. I never asked you to do that, she sobbed. I never asked for any of it. No, you didn't ask. None of you asked. You just took, and took, and took, and then you made me the villain when I couldn't give more. I looked around the room at faces I'd known my entire life, cousins, family friends, neighbors. And all of you believed them. Every single one of you looked at me like I was the problem. Cousin Michael, Sarah's brother, stood up from the head table. Look, maybe we should all just sit down, Michael, I said quietly. I'm not done. I turned back to my parents, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Real fear. Because they were finally realizing that I had documentation for everything. That I'd kept receipts, bank statements, screenshots, and recorded voicemails. That their quiet, compliant scapegoat had been building a case for years without even realizing it. You want to know why I really started keeping track of everything? I asked, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I really was the terrible son you kept telling everyone I was. I pulled up another folder on my phone, my hands steady now despite the chaos erupting around me. So I started documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every time you rewrote history to make me the villain. Dad took a step toward me, his face twisted with rage. You recorded us. Your own family. New York is a one-party consent state, Dad. I learned that when I had to consult with a lawyer about the identity theft. I held up my phone. Should I play the voicemail from last Christmas where you told Aunt Sophie that I refused to help with Mom's medical bills? The same week I'd sent you $3,000 for her supposed surgery that turned out to be Lisa's Vegas trip. Aunt Sophie, who'd been avoiding eye contact, suddenly looked up sharply. Vincent, you told me he said the family could go to hell for all he cared. Because that's what he always tells people. The words exploded out of me. Every single one of you has a story about how selfish and cold I am, but none of you ever actually asked me for help directly. You just went around telling everyone I refused, while I was literally transferring money into your accounts. Sarah's new husband, Tom, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. Maybe we should move this to a private room. No. I turned to face the crowd, many of whom were family friends I'd grown up around. Mrs. Henderson, remember when you pulled me aside at the grocery store last year? Told me I should be ashamed for not helping when my parents were struggling so much. Mrs. Henderson, my third-grade teacher and longtime family friend, nodded slowly. I transferred $1,500 to them that same morning. For Dad's prescription medications that were actually poker debts. I scrolled through my banking history. Mr. Torino, you stopped talking to me after Mom told you I laughed when she asked for help with utilities, right? Our elderly neighbor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. March 15th. $800. I had the screenshot of Mom's thank you text calling me a lifesaver. I looked back at my mother, whose face had gone white. But somehow that became me laughing at your suffering by the time you talked to the neighbors. Marcus, please, Mom whispered, but there was calculation in her eyes, not remorse. She was already figuring out how to spin this, how to make me the crazy one. Oh, but here's my favorite, I said, pulling up a text thread. Jake's wedding fund. Remember, Jake. The $5,000 I sent you in January for your engagement ring for Melissa. The ring you were going to propose with on Valentine's Day. Jake buried his face in his hands. Melissa, sitting beside him, went rigid. Except you never proposed, did you? Because there was no ring. Just like there was no engagement fund. Just like Melissa doesn't know you've been telling the family she's pressuring you for a bigger diamond while you used my money to cover the gambling debts you inherited from Dad. Melissa turned to stare at Jake, her voice barely audible. What is he talking about? Mel, I can explain, Jake started, but she was already standing up, understanding dawning on her face. The casino charges on your credit card, she said slowly. You said those were fraudulent. You said you were disputing them. I was going to stop, Jake said desperately. I am stopping. Marcus, tell her I'm stopping. Tell her yourself, I said. Tell her about the 12-step program you've been claiming to attend while actually meeting your bookie behind the Walmart on Route 9. The whispers around the room grew louder. I could see Sarah's in-laws gathering their things, clearly deciding this wasn't the kind of family they wanted to be associated with. Other guests were following suit, making awkward excuses as they headed for the exits. You're destroying everything, Lisa screamed, mascara now completely streaked down her face. Sarah's wedding, Jake's relationship, the family. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm revealing what was already broken. What's been broken for years while you all worked overtime to convince everyone else, and yourselves, that I was the problem. Uncle Tony was now standing beside Dad, both of them looking like they were considering physically stopping me. But I had one more card to play. Dad, tell Uncle Tony about the life insurance policy on Grandma Rose. The blood drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might collapse. The one you cashed out 6 months after her funeral. The one that was supposed to go to the grandchildren for college, just like her savings account. I looked at Uncle Tony, whose expression was shifting from confusion to horror. $43,000, Tony. Gone. Uncle Tony grabbed Dad's shoulder. Vincent, please tell me he's lying. But Dad's silence was answer enough. The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Tony's face cycled through disbelief, understanding, and finally rage as he turned to stare at his brother. Vince, Tony's voice was barely controlled. Mom made me promise on her deathbed that money would go to the kids' education. She worked herself to the bone. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, Dad interrupted, his voice cracking. It was just a loan, Tony. Just until we got back on our feet. A loan. I pulled up another document on my phone. You mean like the loan you took from Jake's original college fund in 2018? Or the loan from Lisa's savings account that Grandma Rose set up when she was born? My voice was getting steadier with each revelation. Should I tell everyone what happened to the money Great Uncle Sal left for the family reunion fund? Jesus Christ, Marcus, stop, Jake pleaded. You've made your point. Have I? I looked around the rapidly emptying reception hall. Because for 28 years, you've all made me question my own reality. Made me wonder if I really was the selfish, ungrateful son everyone said I was. I turned back to Tony, who was now openly staring at my parents with disgust. Tell him about the Christmas fund, Dad. The one Grandma Rose started in 1995. Mom finally spoke up, her voice shrill with desperation. Marcus, you don't understand the pressure we were under. The bills, the mortgage. I understand perfectly, I cut her off. I understand that you've been systematically stealing from your children's inheritance while convincing the entire family that we're the ungrateful ones. I scrolled to another bank statement. Grandma Rose had $127,000 in various accounts earmarked for her grandchildren. College funds, savings bonds, a small trust she never told you about. Want to guess how much is left? There's a trust. Lisa asked weakly. Was a trust. Liquidated in 2019 to cover gambling debts. Your gambling debts, Dad, not Jake's. Jake's just following in your footsteps. I looked at my sister, whose face was crumpling as the reality hit her. $32,000, Lisa. That was your share. Gone before your 25th birthday. Aunt Marie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Vincent, how could you do this to your own children? We were protecting them, Mom said quickly, her PR training from her old job kicking in. They were too young to handle that kind of money responsibly. We were investing it in the family, in keeping everyone together. You were stealing it, I said flatly. And when it was gone, you made me the villain to cover your tracks. Easier to have everyone believe your son was selfish than admit you gambled away your children's futures. Sarah appeared beside me again, her wedding dress rustling. Her face was tear-streaked but determined. Marcus, I need you to stop now. Please. Half my guests have left, and Tom's parents are getting a very clear picture of what they're marrying into, I finished. I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. But I'm done protecting their secrets at my own expense. Uncle Tony was now holding Dad by the shoulders, his voice low and furious. Where's Mom's jewelry, Vince? The pieces she specifically left to the grandkids. Dad's shoulders sagged in defeat. Pawned, I answered when he couldn't. Most of it in 2020. I had the pawn shop receipts, Dad used me as a reference on the paperwork. I looked at Lisa, whose hand had flown to her throat. Your great-grandmother's pearl necklace, Lisa. The one Mom promised you for your wedding day. Sold for $800 to cover a sports bet. Lisa let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. And the ring? I continued relentlessly. Great-grandma's engagement ring that was supposed to go to the first granddaughter to get married? Sarah's face went completely white. She looked down at her left hand, then back at me. Check the inscription inside the band, Sarah. Forever, my Rose, in Italian. Dad had it resized and gave it to you as a family heirloom, but somehow forgot to mention he'd stolen it from the estate before anyone else knew it existed. Sarah stared down at her wedding ring with a look of dawning horror, slowly twisting it off her finger to read the inscription inside. When she looked back up at me, her face had transformed from embarrassment to pure fury. This was supposed to be my great-grandmother's ring. Her voice was deadly quiet. The ring I'd been wearing for 6 months, thinking it was a generous gift from Uncle Vincent. Sarah, honey, we can talk about this later, Mom started, but Sarah cut her off with a gesture that would have made a traffic cop proud. No. We're talking about it now. She turned to face my parents, still holding the ring like it might bite her. You gave me stolen jewelry for my engagement. Do you have any idea what this means? Tom's grandmother flew in from Sicily specifically to see me wear the family ring that's been talked about for months. I watched Uncle Tony's face cycle through several emotions before landing on something that looked like pure disgust. Vince, that ring belonged to Papa's first wife. It's been in the family for over a century. We were keeping it safe, Dad said weakly, but even he seemed to know how pathetic that sounded. Safe. Tony's voice rose. You pawned our mother's pearls, stole the kids' college money, and now you've got Sarah walking around wearing stolen family heirlooms at her own wedding. Cousin Michael stood up from the head table, his face flushed with anger. Sarah, take the ring off. Now. I am not the problem here, Michael, Sarah snapped, but she was already sliding the ring back onto her finger. Marcus, how long have you known about this? I found out about the ring last week when I was going through the estate documents. I was trying to figure out where all the money went. I pulled up another file on my phone, my hand surprisingly steady despite the chaos around me. That's actually how I discovered everything else. The lawyer had been wondering why none of the grandchildren had claimed their inheritances. What lawyer? Mom asked, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely afraid. Grandma Rose's estate attorney. Turns out, when you liquidate trust funds and pawn family jewelry, it leaves a paper trail. Especially when the beneficiaries never signed off on any of it. I looked directly at her. Forgery is a felony in New York, Mom. The remaining wedding guests had gone completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring at our family implosion. Uncle Tony released Dad's shoulders and took a step back, his face pale. Marcus, are you saying your parents forged legal documents? I'm saying I have copies of withdrawal forms, estate transfers, and trust liquidation papers with signatures that don't match the ones on file at the bank. I scrolled to a folder labeled Legal Documents on my phone. I'm also saying that Grandma Rose's attorney has been trying to reach all the grandchildren for 3 years to discuss irregularities in the estate distribution, but somehow those calls and letters never made it to us. Lisa looked up sharply. What calls? What letters? The ones Mom and Dad intercepted. The certified mail you never received because they changed the address on your estate paperwork to their house. I looked at Jake, whose face had gone ashen. Remember when you moved back in with them after college? They had you sign a bunch of address change forms for your student loans. Jake nodded slowly, understanding creeping across his features. Those weren't just for student loans. They made themselves your legal forwarding address for all estate-related correspondence. I turned my phone screen toward the remaining guests. 18 months of certified letters from Goldstein, Martinez and Associates, all regarding discrepancies in Rose Castellano's estate distribution. All signed for by Vincent or Elena Castellano. Oh my God, Lisa whispered. They've been stealing from us for years. Not just stealing, I corrected. Systematically looting every inheritance, trust fund, and savings account Grandma Rose set up for us, while making me look like the ungrateful son who wouldn't help his struggling family. I looked around the room at the faces of relatives who'd been judging me for years. And it worked perfectly until I got curious about why I was living paycheck to paycheck despite making good money and never seeing a dime of my inheritance. Sarah's new husband Tom finally spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. Marcus, when you say legal irregularities, are we talking about something that needs to be reported to authorities? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could see my parents exchange a look of pure panic, finally understanding that this had moved beyond family drama into potentially criminal territory. That depends, I said quietly, on whether certain people think a sincere apology and full restitution might be worth more than a grand jury investigation. The silence that followed my ultimatum stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. I could hear the kitchen staff in the back clinking dishes, completely oblivious to the nuclear explosion happening in their dining room. Dad's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly yellow. You're threatening your own family. I'm offering my family a choice, I corrected. The same choice you should have given us before stealing our inheritance. I glanced around the nearly empty reception hall. Though I have to say, the audience for this conversation has gotten a lot smaller in the past 10 minutes. Uncle Tony stepped between me and Dad, his voice deadly serious. Marcus, exactly how much money are we talking about here? I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been building for weeks. From Grandma Rose's estate alone. $127,000 across 4 grandchildren. That's not counting the money I've been sending them monthly, or the identity theft, or the various loans they've taken from accounts we didn't even know existed. Jesus, Tony breathed. Vince, please tell me this kid is exaggerating. But Mom was already in damage control mode, her voice taking on that manipulative sweetness she used when she was about to rewrite history. Marcus, honey, you're making this sound so much worse than it was. We were family. We were taking care of each other. That's what families do. Families don't forge documents, Mom. I turned to Sarah, who was still staring at her wedding ring like it might transform into a snake. Sarah, I'm sorry this happened at your wedding. I really am. But they forced my hand when Dad decided to publicly humiliate me while I've been keeping them financially afloat for years. Sarah looked up at me, and I was surprised to see that her anger seemed to be shifting away from me and toward our parents. How much, Marcus? How much have you been giving them? $43,200 over the past 3 years. I didn't even need to check my phone anymore, I had the number memorized. Plus another $8,000 in various emergency payments. Jake's car, Lisa's credit cards, Mom's medical bills that turned out to be vacation funds. Lisa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The medical bills were fake. Not fake, Mom said quickly. Just delayed. I was going to have that procedure done eventually. She used your surgery fund to pay for a cruise to the Bahamas in February, I said flatly. I have the credit card statements. Royal Caribbean, February 14th through 21st. The same week she was supposedly recovering from gallbladder surgery. Jake looked like he was about to throw up. Marcus, the money you sent me for the ring. I really did want to propose to Melissa. With gambling winnings? I asked. Because that was the plan, right? Take my $5,000, turn it into 10 at the track, buy the ring and have money left over to pay Dad back. I looked at Melissa, whose face was a mask of humiliation and rage. How much did he actually lose, Melissa? You know, don't you? You've been covering his debts. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. 12,000. I took out a loan against my car. You what? Jake spun to face her. Mel, you said that was for your sisters. My sister doesn't exist, Jake, she exploded. I made her up because I was too embarrassed to tell people my fiancé had gambling debts that were bigger than my salary. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. He told me you refused to help. That you said his problems weren't your responsibility. Of course he did. I looked around the table at what was left of my family. It's the family specialty. Take money from me with one hand while telling everyone I'm selfish with the other. Uncle Tony was now pacing behind Dad's chair, his face getting redder by the minute. Vince, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're going to fix this. All of it. Starting with paying back every penny you stole from these kids. Tony, you don't understand the pressure we've been under, Dad started, but Tony cut him off with a sharp gesture. The pressure? You mean the pressure of having 3 successful, educated children who were quietly supporting you while you systematically robbed them blind? Tony's voice was getting louder. Marcus has been working himself to death to keep you afloat while you've been telling everyone he abandoned his family. We never said he abandoned, Mom tried to interject. You told Aunt Rose's nursing home friends that Marcus refused to contribute to her funeral expenses, I said. I paid for half the flowers and the entire catering bill. But somehow the story became that I was too cheap to honor my grandmother's memory. Cousin Sarah's mother-in-law, who I thought had left with the other guests, appeared beside our table. She must have been waiting in the lobby, probably trying to figure out what to tell her family about the circus they just witnessed. Excuse me, she said politely, her Italian accent thick with disapproval, but did I understand correctly that there are legal issues with your grandmother's estate? The question landed like a bomb in the middle of our family drama. Because Tom's family was old-school Italian Catholic, the kind of people who took inheritance fraud and family honor very seriously. Mom's face went white as she realized the implications. It was one thing to have this conversation in front of our own relatives, but having Tom's family witness our dirty laundry could impact Sarah's marriage before it even began. Mrs. DeMarco, Mom said carefully, this is just a family misunderstanding. Nothing that can't be worked out privately. But Mrs. DeMarco was staring at Sarah's wedding ring with a very uncomfortable expression. That inscription inside the band. Forever, my Rose, in Italian. My grandmother had a ring exactly like that. Very unusual engraving style from the old country. Sarah froze. Your grandmother? My grandmother Rose. Rose Castellano, before she married my grandfather DeMarco. Mrs. DeMarco's eyes narrowed as she looked from Sarah to my parents. She was Vincent's aunt, I believe. She always spoke of the ring she left for her brother's grandchildren. The blood drained from Dad's face as he realized what had just happened. Tom's grandmother wasn't just some random Italian matriarch. She was family. Extended family who knew exactly which ring Sarah was wearing and exactly who it was supposed to belong to. And she just caught us in the middle of our very public meltdown about inheritance fraud. Mrs. DeMarco's revelation hit the table like a grenade going off. The ring on Sarah's finger, my great-grandmother's ring, suddenly had a witness. Someone who knew its history, its value, and exactly who had the right to wear it. Nana Rosa, Mrs. DeMarco continued, her voice taking on a reverent tone, she used to tell me stories about that ring. How it belonged to her husband's first wife, how it had been in a Castellano family since 1892. She was so proud that it would go to the first granddaughter to marry. Her eyes fixed on Sarah's hand with laser focus. She died 3 years ago, still talking about making sure little Sarah got the ring when her time came. Sarah's face crumpled. She knew about me specifically. Bambina, she had pictures of you on her nightstand. She used to say you had her eyes, that you deserved to wear the ring of the strong women who came before you. Mrs. DeMarco's expression hardened as she turned toward my parents. What she did not know, apparently, was that some people would steal it before you could receive it properly. The accusation hung in the air like incense, heavy, inescapable, and making everyone deeply uncomfortable. Tom appeared behind his grandmother, his face pale as he realized the magnitude of what he just walked into. Nah, maybe we should discuss this privately, he started, but she waved him off with the imperious gesture of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. No, Tommaso. This is family business, and family business gets settled in the open. She looked directly at my father. Vincent Castellano, you took that ring from your mother's jewelry box before the will was read, didn't you? Dad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I'd never seen him look so thoroughly cornered. I have documentation, I said quietly, pulling up another file on my phone. The estate inventory lists one antique diamond ring with Italian inscription as missing from the jewelry collection. The lawyer's notes indicate it disappeared between the time of death and the official estate cataloging. Marcus, Mom hissed, you're destroying your sister's wedding day. No, Elena, Mrs. DeMarco interrupted, using Mom's full name with the kind of authority that made everyone at the table sit up straighter. Your husband destroyed Sarah's wedding day the moment he decided to build her happiness on stolen foundation. She turned to Sarah, her voice gentling. Cara mia, that ring carries the love of 4 generations of strong women. But it cannot carry lies. It will not bring you luck if it came to you through deception. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't the hysterical tears from earlier. These were the quiet, devastating tears of someone whose entire world had just shifted. What am I supposed to do? I got married 3 hours ago wearing stolen jewelry. You fix it, Mrs. DeMarco said firmly. You do what strong women have always done when the men in their families make mistakes. You clean up the mess and you make sure it never happens again. She looked around the table at my parents, Jake, and Lisa. All of you. Uncle Tony, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly straightened up. Wait a minute. Mrs. DeMarco, you said your grandmother was Vincent's aunt. Rosa Castellano married my grandfather's brother in 1943. She was family. Mrs. DeMarco's eyes narrowed. Which means I have just as much right to know what happened to her estate as anyone else at this table. My father looked like he was about to pass out. Because Mrs. DeMarco wasn't just Tom's grandmother, she was another potential witness to the systematic looting of Grandma Rosa's estate. Someone else who might have legal standing to ask uncomfortable questions. Mrs. DeMarco, I said carefully, would you like to see the estate attorney's correspondence? The letters about irregularities in the distribution? Her smile was sharp as a knife. Tommaso, call your cousin Anthony. The one who works for the district attorney's office. Tell him his new grandmother-in-law needs to have a conversation about family financial matters. And that's when I realized that my nuclear option had just gotten a whole lot more nuclear. The mention of a district attorney cousin made my father's face go from pale yellow to ash gray. I watched him grip the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Mrs. DeMarco, Mom said, her voice taking on that desperate edge she got when her usual manipulation tactics weren't working, surely we don't need to involve outside authorities in what amounts to a family disagreement. Forgery is not a family disagreement, Mrs. DeMarco interrupted coolly. Identity theft is not a family disagreement. Stealing from your own children's inheritance is not a family disagreement. She pulled out her phone, a surprisingly modern smartphone that looked tiny in her weathered hands. Tommaso, what is Anthony's number? Nana, wait, Tom said, glancing nervously between his grandmother and Sarah. Maybe we should let them try to work this out first. Give them a chance to make it right. But I could see the calculation in Mrs. DeMarco's eyes. She was old-school Italian, the kind of woman who'd watched her own family struggle through the Depression while rich relatives lived in luxury. The idea that parents would steal from their children's future was probably the most offensive thing she could imagine. How much time did they give Marcus to make it right when they were spending his inheritance, she asked pointedly. How much consideration did they show when they were telling the whole family he was selfish? Uncle Tony was nodding along with every word. She's right, Vince. You've had years to come clean about this. Instead, you doubled down and made Marcus look like the villain. I looked around the table at what remained of my family and felt something I hadn't expected, a weird sense of calm. For 28 years, I'd been gaslit into believing that I was the problem, that my memory was unreliable, that my hurt feelings were unjustified. But now, with documentation spread across my phone screen and witnesses who weren't invested in protecting my parents' lies, the truth felt solid and unshakable. Mrs. DeMarco, I said carefully, before you call your grandson, there's something else you should know. About the funeral expenses. Dad actually whimpered. Marcus, please. Grandma Rose's funeral cost $8,000. Mom and Dad told everyone I refused to contribute because I was too busy with my fancy city life. I pulled up my banking app again. I paid $4,000 directly to Benedetto Funeral Home on September 15, 2021. I have the receipt. Mrs. DeMarco's eyebrows shot up. You paid for half of Rose's funeral. More than half. I also paid for the flowers, the catering for the reception, and the memorial cards. Total, $6,400. I looked directly at my mother. But somehow the story everyone heard was that I was too selfish to honor my grandmother's memory. Sarah let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Is there anything they didn't lie about? Your wedding dress, I said. Though I'm sure if I dug deeper, I'd find out the family discount at the bridal shop was actually my money too. The look that crossed Sarah's face told me I'd hit closer to the mark than I'd intended. The dress deposit, she whispered. Mom said she had savings. Said she'd been putting money aside for my wedding since I was little. Sarah, Mom started, but Sarah cut her off with a gesture that could have stopped traffic. How much of my wedding did Marcus pay for without knowing it? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, and I realized that even I didn't know the answer. Because if they'd been systematically stealing from all of us for years, then every dollar they'd spent on family expenses was essentially our own money being used to maintain the illusion of their generosity. Mrs. DeMarco was already dialing her phone. Mrs. DeMarco was already dialing when Jake suddenly stood up, swaying slightly. Wait. Just, wait, okay. His voice cracked. Marcus, if you do this, if you involve the DA, we all go down. You know that, right? Lisa's DUIs, my credit card stuff, even Sarah's wedding could be considered receiving stolen property. The room went deadly quiet. It was the first smart thing Jake had said all night, and the implications hit everyone simultaneously. Mrs. DeMarco paused with her finger hovering over the call button. He's right, Tom said quietly, his lawyer training kicking in. Sarah, if that ring is legally considered stolen property, wearing it could technically make you an accessory after the fact, Sarah finished, her voice hollow. She twisted the ring off her finger and set it on the table like it was radioactive. So even the victims become criminals. How perfectly fucked up is that? Uncle Tony was staring at the ring sitting on the white tablecloth, its diamonds catching the light from the chandeliers. Your mother would be rolling in her grave, Vince. Rosa worked herself to death so her grandkids could have better lives, and you turned them all into unwilling accomplices. We never meant for it to go this far, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was just supposed to be temporary. A few thousand here and there until we got back on our feet. $47,000 from my college fund was temporary. I pulled up another statement. The life insurance payout of $43,000 was temporary. What about the Christmas fund Grandma Rose started in 1995? $22,000, gone by 2019. Still temporary. Lisa was doing math in her head, her face getting paler with each number. Marcus, how much total? Everything combined, how much did they steal? I scrolled through my spreadsheet, adding up columns I'd been building for weeks. The final number made my stomach clench. From inheritance, trust funds, and insurance policies. $194,000 across the 4 grandchildren. That's not counting the money I've been sending them monthly. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. I watched Uncle Tony's face go through several expressions before settling on something that looked like disgust mixed with awe. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, he breathed. Vince, that's more money than most people make in 4 years. You stole nearly $200,000 from your own kids. But Mom was already working her angles, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she used when she was about to shift blame. Marcus, you're being very dramatic about money that was going to stay in the family anyway. It's not like we spent it on strangers. You spent it on gambling debts, I said flatly. Dad's poker games, Jake's sports betting, your cruise to the Bahamas. How exactly was that staying in the family? Mrs. DeMarco had been listening intently, her phone still in her hand. $194,000, she repeated slowly. Cara mia, that's not family financial trouble. That's organized theft. Which brings us back to the DA's office, Tom said grimly. Because at those numbers, we're talking about felony fraud. Multiple counts. This isn't something that gets handled in family court. I looked around the table at faces I'd known my entire life, some horrified, some calculating, all of them finally understanding that this had moved far beyond hurt feelings and family drama into territory where lawyers and prosecutors would be making the decisions. There's one more thing, I said quietly, pulling up the folder I'd been saving for last. The second mortgage on the house. The one you took out in 2020 and somehow managed to get me listed as a cosigner. Dad's face went completely white. $28,000, still outstanding. Guess who's been getting the late payment notices forwarded to his apartment? I looked directly at him. Guess whose credit score tanked when you stopped making payments last year? The second mortgage revelation hit the table like a physical blow. I watched my father's face cycle through denial, panic, and finally a kind of defeated acceptance that told everyone he'd been caught in yet another lie. Marcus, he said weakly, we never meant for you to actually be liable for that. The bank required a cosigner with good credit, and we figured we'd have it paid off before. Before I found out. I interrupted. Before my credit got destroyed. Or before the bank started calling my work asking why I wasn't returning their calls about a defaulted loan I didn't even know existed. Mrs. DeMarco set her phone down with a sharp click. Vincent Castellano, you put debt in your son's name without his knowledge. After everything else we've just heard. It's called mortgage fraud, Tom said quietly, his lawyer brain working overtime. That's federal territory. FBI, not just the DA's office. Lisa buried her face in her hands. Oh my God, Marcus, your job. If your employer finds out you're connected to mortgage fraud. They already know, I said. I had to disclose it when the background check for my security clearance came back flagged. I spent 3 months explaining to federal investigators why my name was attached to property I'd never seen paperwork for. I looked at my parents, feeling that cold calm settling over me again. I nearly lost my clearance. Nearly lost my job. All while you were telling people I was too selfish to help my struggling family. Uncle Tony stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's it. Vince, I'm done enabling this. You've committed crimes. Multiple felonies. Against your own children. He turned to me. Marcus, whatever you decide to do, you have my full support. This family has been gaslighting you for years while you bankrolled their lies. Tony, please, Mom pleaded, think about what this will do to the grandchildren. Sarah's new marriage, Jake's relationship with Melissa. What about what you've already done to them? Mrs. DeMarco interrupted. Sarah's marriage started with stolen jewelry and lies. Jake's relationship is built on gambling debts and fraud. How is the truth worse than that foundation? Melissa, who'd been silent through most of the mortgage discussion, finally spoke up. Jake, the apartment application we filled out last month. You said your brother was going to co-sign if we needed help with the deposit. Jake's face went gray. Mel, that's not, I wasn't going to actually. You were going to forge his signature again, weren't you? Her voice was deadly quiet. Just like your parents taught you. Take what you need from Marcus and worry about the consequences later. I wouldn't have gone through with it, Jake protested weakly, but even he seemed to know how pathetic that sounded. I pulled up another document on my phone, hands steady despite the chaos around me. Actually, you did go through with it. The application was approved yesterday. I got a call from the property management company congratulating me on helping my brother secure such a nice place. I looked at Melissa, whose face had gone completely white. 2-bedroom apartment in Westchester, first month and security deposit already charged to a credit card in my name. Total, $4,800. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Melissa's chair scraping as she stood up. I'm done, she said simply, pulling off her engagement ring and setting it on the table next to my great-grandmother's wedding band. Jake, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending this is normal, that love conquers fraud and identity theft and pathological lying. She walked away without another word, leaving Jake staring at the 2 rings sitting on the white tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. Melissa, wait. Jake called after her, but she was already halfway across the empty reception hall. Marcus, look what you've done. She was the best thing in my life. No, I said quietly, what you've done. What all of you have done. I just finally stopped covering for it. The sound of Melissa's heels clicking across the marble floor seemed to echo forever in the silence that followed Jake's outburst. I watched my brother stare at the 2 rings on the table, one stolen, one rejected, and felt something shift inside me that I couldn't quite name. Jake, I said quietly, Melissa wasn't the best thing in your life. She was the person willing to destroy her own financial future to enable your gambling addiction. There's a difference. Don't you dare, he started, but Uncle Tony cut him off. The boy's right, Jake. A woman who loves you doesn't take out loans to pay your bookie. She gets you help or she gets you gone. Tony's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen this pattern before. Your cousin Danny went through the same thing in the 90s. Know what saved his marriage? His wife threatened to call the police if he placed another bet. Mrs. DeMarco was studying the engagement ring Melissa had left behind, turning it slowly in the light. Tommaso, this stone. It's not a diamond. Tom leaned closer to examine it. Cubic zirconia. Good quality, but definitely not real. Jake's face flushed red. So. Melissa didn't care about the size or the cost. She just wanted a real relationship, I finished. Built on honesty instead of credit card fraud. I pulled up another bank statement on my phone. Jake, the $5,000 I sent you for her ring in January. Where did it actually go? His silence was answer enough. Let me guess, I continued. Super Bowl weekend. You were going to double it on the big game, buy her a real diamond, maybe have enough left over to actually pay some bills. I scrolled through the dates on my banking app. February 7th, the day after the game. That's when you called crying about Mom's emergency surgery, isn't it? Because your sure thing bet fell through and you needed to cover your losses before the guys you owe money to started getting impatient. How do you know about? Jake stopped himself, but the damage was done. Know about what, Jake? The loan sharks. The threats? The reason you haven't been staying at your apartment for the past 2 months? I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my brother was essentially homeless and sleeping on different couches every night? Mom grabbed Jake's arm. Honey, you said you were staying with friends because your lease was up. His lease isn't up until August, I said. He's been hiding because he owes money to people who don't accept payment plans. I turned to Dad, whose face had gone ashen. Sound familiar? Like father, like son, right Dad? How much do you owe Tony Marconi these days? The name hit the table like a physical slap. Uncle Tony's head snapped up, his face darkening with recognition and anger. Jesus Christ, Vince. Not Tony Marconi. Please tell me you didn't borrow money from Tony fucking Marconi. Dad's silence was more terrifying than any confession could have been. Mrs. DeMarco looked between them with growing alarm. Who is Tony Marconi? Someone who collects debts with baseball bats, Uncle Tony said grimly. Someone who doesn't care about family connections or sob stories. He turned to stare at my father with what looked like genuine fear. Vince, how much? It was supposed to be short-term, Dad whispered. Just to cover the second mortgage payments until... How much, Vincent? $37,000. With interest. The number hung in the air like a death sentence, and I realized that my family's problems were even bigger than I'd imagined. Uncle Tony's face went from dark to murderous as the $37,000 figure sank in. Vince, you borrowed from Tony Marconi using what is collateral? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, and Dad's silence told everyone everything they needed to know. The house, I said quietly, pieces clicking into place in my head. That's why you needed me as a co-signer on the second mortgage. You'd already put the house up as collateral with Marconi, so you needed clean credit to get a legitimate loan to pay him back. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Dad said desperately. The second mortgage was going to clear everything up, get us square with Tony, give us a fresh start. But you stopped making payments on the mortgage last year, I continued, my voice eerily calm despite the chaos erupting around me. Which means the bank is going to foreclose, which means Tony Marconi is going to lose his collateral, which means you're all fucked, a new voice interrupted from behind us. Everyone at the table spun around to see a man in an expensive suit standing in the reception hall doorway. He was short, maybe 5'6", with graying hair and the kind of dead eyes that suggested violence was just another business tool. Tony. Dad's voice cracked like a teenager's. I wasn't expecting, we were just having a nice family chat. Tony Marconi stepped into the room, flanked by two much larger men who looked like they'd been ordered from a catalog labeled generic intimidating muscle. Funny thing, Vince. I was having dinner at Ristorante Lombardi across the street when my cousin called. Said there was some interesting conversation happening at the Castellano wedding about missing money and federal investigations. Mrs. DeMarco had gone completely rigid in her chair, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Tom moved protectively closer to Sarah, whose face had drained of all color. Mr. Marconi, Uncle Tony said carefully, this is a family matter. Maybe we could discuss. Family matter? Marconi's laugh sounded like grinding glass. Vince here borrowed 37 grand using his house as collateral. House that apparently has a second mortgage he's not paying, which makes my loan significantly less secure. His dead eyes fixed on me. You must be Marcus. The son who's been keeping Daddy's gambling habit funded. The words hit me like ice water. Because he was right, every dollar I'd sent my parents over the past 3 years had ultimately gone to feeding Dad's addiction, which meant I'd been unknowingly bankrolling organized crime. I didn't know, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. About the gambling, about you, about any of it. Course you didn't. But here's the thing about ignorance, kid, it doesn't change what you owe. Marconi walked slowly around our table, examining the 2 rings still sitting on the white tablecloth. Nice stones. Real diamonds, unlike the fake rock your brother bought his girlfriend with borrowed money. Jake made a strangled sound. How do you know about your debts too? Marconi smiled, and it was absolutely terrifying. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Jake. You owe my associates 8 grand, your old man owes me 37, and now I hear there might be federal investigators sniffing around the family finances. He stopped walking and stared directly at me. That's what we call a problem. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip painful through my suit jacket. Marcus, we need to call the police. No police, one of Marconi's men said quietly, speaking for the first time. This stays family business. Mrs. DeMarco stood up slowly, her phone still in her hand, her Italian accent thick with barely controlled rage. You dare threaten children at a wedding? In front of their famiglia? Marconi studied her with the interest of a snake examining a particularly bold mouse. You must be the new grandmother. Mrs. DeMarco, right? Your grandson Anthony works for the DA's office. Promising young prosecutor, from what I hear. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and I watched Mrs. DeMarco's face cycle through fear, rage, and finally calculation. Ben, she said quietly, setting her phone down on the table with deliberate care. Then we understand each other. The standoff stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marconi's presence had transformed our family drama into something genuinely dangerous, and I could see the calculation in everyone's eyes as they tried to figure out how to navigate around a man who collected debts with violence. Here's what's going to happen, Marconi said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Vincent and Jake are going to figure out how to pay what they owe. With interest. By Friday. That's 4 days, I said, my brain automatically doing the math. $45,000 in 4 days. 48,000, Marconi corrected pleasantly. Interest compounds daily when payments are late. And Jake's portion just went up to 10 grand because his girlfriend walking out makes him a flight risk. Jake let out a sound like a wounded animal. Melissa didn't leave because of the money. Kid, she left because she finally figured out you're a degenerate gambler who steals from his own brother. Trust me, I've seen this pattern 100 times. Marconi picked up my great-grandmother's ring from the table, examining it in the light. This might cover Jake's debt. Antique Italian craftsmanship, real diamonds, probably worth 12 to 15,000 to the right collector. That ring belongs to Sarah, Mrs. DeMarco said, her voice deadly quiet. It was stolen from the family estate. And now it's going to pay the family debts. Funny how these things work out. Marconi slipped the ring into his jacket pocket like he was taking a business card. Vincent, you've got 3 days to come up with the remaining 38,000. Uncle Tony stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Marconi, be reasonable. These are good people who made bad choices. They're not criminals. They committed identity theft, mortgage fraud, and estate fraud. In my book, that makes them criminals. Just not very good ones. Marconi's smile widened. But Marcus here, he's interesting. Clean credit, steady job, government security clearance. He's worth more to me employed than broken. The implication sent ice through my veins. I'm not co-signing anything else. I'm not taking out loans to pay gambling debts. Course not. That would be stupid. Marconi pulled out his phone, scrolling through something that made his smile even more predatory. But you've got a 401k worth $43,000. Investment accounts totaling another $28,000. And that little emergency fund your grandmother Rose left you, the one your parents haven't found yet. My blood went completely cold. How do you know about? Kid, when someone owes me 37 grand, I research their entire family tree. Amazing what you can find with a social security number and the right connections. He showed me his phone screen, which displayed a summary of my financial accounts with terrifying accuracy. The emergency fund is cute, by the way. Hidden account at Teachers Federal Credit Union under your grandmother's maiden name. $15,000 you've been saving for a house down payment. The room spun around me as I realized that not only had my parents stolen my known inheritance, but somehow their debts had exposed savings accounts I'd specifically hidden from them. Accounts they didn't even know existed. Marcus, Sarah whispered, you don't have to. Actually, he does, Marconi interrupted. Because here's the thing about family debt. It doesn't care who incurred it. It just cares who can pay it. He put his phone away and straightened his tie with casual precision. Friday, noon, Torino's Deli on Arthur Avenue. Bring 48,000 in cash, or we start exploring more creative collection methods. He turned to leave, then paused at our table one more time. Oh, and Marcus. If you're thinking about calling your Fed friends about this conversation, remember that your security clearance requires you to report all family criminal activity. Funny how that works out, isn't it? The threat hung in the air as he walked away, leaving us staring at each other across a table that now felt like a crime scene. The silence after Marconi left felt like the aftermath of an explosion. I stared at the empty doorway where he disappeared, my mind reeling with the realization that my family's dysfunction had just put me in genuine physical danger. $48,000, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. By Friday. Marcus, honey, Mom started, her voice taking on that manipulative sweetness again, we'll figure something out. As a family. We always do. Something inside me snapped completely. No, I said, standing up so abruptly my chair toppled backward. We're not figuring anything out as a family. You're figuring it out. All of you. I'm done. Marcus, please, Dad said desperately, Marconi will hurt all of us if we don't pay. You can't just walk away. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app one more time, fingers flying across the screen. I'm transferring every penny from my accounts to a new bank. Tonight. The $43,000 in my 401k. I'm taking the early withdrawal penalty and moving it somewhere you can't touch it. The hidden emergency fund. Gone. My checking account, savings, everything. I looked around the table at their panicked faces. And first thing Monday morning, I'm filing police reports for identity theft, mortgage fraud, and estate fraud. All of it. Let the DA's office sort out whether you're victims or criminals. You can't do that to your own family, Lisa sobbed, but her tears felt as hollow as everything else they'd ever told me. My own family has been doing worse to me for years. I picked up Jake's abandoned engagement ring from the table, the fake one Melissa had rejected. This is what you are. All of you. Cheap imitations of a real family, hoping no one looks close enough to notice you're worthless. Mrs. DeMarco was watching this with something that looked like approval. Bravo, Bambino. A man who won't defend himself has nothing worth defending. Marcus, Uncle Tony said quietly, what about Marconi? If you walk away now. If I stay, he owns me forever. Every time one of you gambles away rent money or crashes a car or needs bail, I become responsible for your debts. I shook my head. I'd rather disappear than spend the rest of my life being your ATM while you tell everyone I'm the problem. I pulled up my contacts and hit a number I programmed months ago but never called. Agent Morrison. This is Marcus Castellano. We talked about my security clearance last year. Yes, sir, I need to report criminal activity involving my immediate family members. Tonight, if possible. Dad's face went white. Marcus, don't. Identity theft, mortgage fraud, estate fraud, and coercion by organized crime figures. I watched my father crumble as I spoke. I have documentation for everything, sir. Bank statements, forged signatures, recorded conversations. Yes, I understand I should have reported this earlier. I hung up and looked at my family one last time. Agent Morrison will be here in an hour. I suggest you use that time to get your story straight, because the FBI takes financial crimes very seriously. Especially ones involving security clearance holders. Sarah grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Marcus, wait. What about us? The people who actually love you. I looked at my cousin, my sister in every way that mattered, and felt my resolve waver for just a moment. Then I saw Tom behind her, saw Mrs. DeMarco's approving nod, saw Uncle Tony's supportive expression, and realized something important. Sarah, you married into a good family. A family that tells the truth, keeps their promises, and doesn't steal from their children. I squeezed her hand. Stay with them. Build something real with Tom. And if you want a relationship with me, you know my number. But it'll be just us. No more family packages deals with people who think love means having the right to destroy me. I walked away from that table, away from 28 years of gaslighting and financial abuse, away from people who had trained me to believe that being their victim was the same thing as being loved. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison, ETA 45 minutes. Stay safe. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I actually could.